We all experience profound loss. A loved one dies. A deeply held ideal, like liberty, collapses. A country falls. These exact events act as the absolute starting point for two vastly different psychological reactions, normal mourning and melancholia. This matrix shows the initial clinical presentation. Under both conditions, we see profound sorrow, a complete withdrawal of interest from the outside world, a stark inhibition of normal day-to-day activity. Looking strictly at these surface-level symptoms, the two reactions are clinically indistinguishable, yet one process eventually heals the mind, while the other systematically destroys it. Sigmund Freud noted that despite this identical initial presentation, the long-term prognosis diverges completely. Mourning is a self-resolving process. We expect the individual to overcome it over time. In fact, medical intervention is viewed as useless or even harmful to the process. Melancholia presents an entirely different reality. Freud diagnosed it as a severe pathological disposition, a condition requiring active, urgent intervention. The distinction lies not in the depth of the sorrow. The divergence happens because of a catastrophic, hidden structural failure within the ego itself. To trace the danger of melancholia, we have to look past the visible symptoms and map the invisible architecture of the psyche. Returning to the clinical matrix, there is exactly one diagnostic boundary separating the two conditions. In normal mourning, the individual is in overwhelming emotional pain, but their self-esteem remains completely intact. For the melancholic patient, self-worth collapses entirely. They relentlessly reproach themselves. They express feelings of utter worthlessness, often culminating in a delusional expectation of severe punishment. In normal mourning, the patient feels that the external world has become poor and empty. In melancholia, the patient feels that their own ego has become poor and empty. In melancholia, the loss of an object is experienced as a loss of the self. To see how the ego breaks down, we have to look at the mechanics of attachment. This diagram outlines Freud's normal psychic economy. It shows how human attachment operates between the ego and an external object. Humans possess finite psychic energy, libidinal investment. We attach this energy to things, ideals, and people we love. When loss occurs, reality testing activates, providing objective proof the loved object no longer exists. Reality testing demands a strict economic transaction. All libidinal energy must be withdrawn immediately. Humans universally resist this demand. We stubbornly refuse to willingly abandon a libidinal position, even when a substitute object is readily available. Normal mourning is the agonizing process of overcoming that resistance. The mind retracts the invested energy back into the self. Once the withdrawal is complete, the freed energy is directed outward again, attaching to a new object. Mourning is intensely painful, but it is ultimately a successful economic transaction. It preserves the ego and allows life to continue. In the melancholic mind, reality testing fails to trigger healthy withdrawal. Unable to process objective loss, libidinal energy is left stranded. Instead of returning to the ego to seek a new target, the mind violently absorbs the idea of the lost object directly into itself. This is the melancholic short circuit. The lost object permanently merges with the patient's own identity. The external loss translates directly into an internal loss of the ego. By internalizing the lost object, the melancholic creates a permanent haunting within their own psychic architecture. The mind is now rigged for self-destruction. We can now re-examine the melancholic's most severe symptom, their aggressive, relentless self-reproach. Structurally, the patient is not actually attacking their true self. The self-hatred is directed at the internalized shadow of the abandoned object that now resides inside the ego. Because the target of their anger is now internal, the ego absorbs the collateral damage. It effectively consumes and punishes itself with its own misdirected aggression. The paradoxical self-hatred of melancholia is a disguised attack on an abandoned love. It traps the mind in a civil war it cannot win. This diagram compares the final states of the two psychic economies side by side. Mourning represents the painful yet ultimately successful processing of an objective loss in the real world. Melancholia represents the catastrophic internalization of loss, forcing the ego to process its own destruction. This internal degradation carries a direct consequence for the physical body. Freud concludes that the ego can only turn its aggression on itself once it has successfully identified with the lost object. By internalizing the target of its hatred, the ego's own instinct for self-preservation is bypassed. In this blind attempt to strike the internalized object, the ego ultimately destroys the physical body. The defining tragedy of melancholia is a fatal imbalance of psychic scale. The gravitational pull of the lost object simply surpasses the ego's capacity to survive it.